Well, hi, and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Billy Thomas, and we both work at the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And again, another jam-packed show. We never disappoint on that, do we, really?
No doubt, Renee. I'm really excited about today's show. We've got 4 different topics that we're going to be featuring, and one's a reoccurring regular, our Tree of the Week, but we also are bringing back, and he's actually the current president of the Kentucky Woodland Owners Association, as well as the chairman of the Kentucky Tree Farm Committee, Mr. Doug McLaren. Doug's going to be talking about growth rings and all the stories that trees tell through them. So that's going to be really awesome. And then we also have Megan Bulin and Ellen Crocker going to be talking about mushrooms. They're starting a new feature. What's that mushroom, or what's the fungi, I guess. So that'll be interesting as well. And then we have Dr. Matt Springer with a special guest, Dr. Stephen Price, talking about some snake ID stuff. So another great show, and we're so glad you all are with us today. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can use the chat pod to interact with us. And if you're on Facebook Live, please use the comments section. But again, thanks for being with us today.
Definitely. So let's get started. Doug, if you're there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doug, for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Hey, Doug. Welcome to From the Woods Today.
I'm here.
That's awesome.
I'm here.
Tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about today.
Okay, well, there's a variety of things that we can see when we go out there in the forest, and I was going to talk about that on the front end of it. But one of the things that I was going to mention this in the session also, DNA. I think it's built into our DNA that whenever we see a cross section of a piece of wood, we feel compelled to start counting those rings. We just feel compelled to do it. And so I wanted to say that there's more to it than just counting the age, and that'll be the part of the program explaining what you can see in those rings themselves. What stories do they tell? So,
well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Ready to take off?
Yes, sir. Thanks for being with us, and then thanks for putting this together, Doug.
I want to thank all those individuals that are with us today, whether you're in Wisconsin or maybe you're in Eastern Tennessee or Western Kentucky, wherever it might be. Certainly glad to have you with us today. Again, like Lori and Renee said, my name is Doug McLaren. I retired from the University of Kentucky about 5 years ago. And what I mean by retirement is I no longer receive a check from the University of Kentucky. But last week I did 2 programs, and then this week I think I'm doing 2 programs also. I enjoy doing it, or I wouldn't be doing it. So, stories that trees tell us. Most of us, we simply walk into a forest and we see all of these trees, and there's a number of stories that we can actually tell from these trees that are standing there in the forest. First of all, species themselves. Here in the Appalachian Mountains, we are blessed with a variety of species, over 100 different trees that are important to the Forestry Association, and for one reason or another. But species, we can go from one place to another and we see different species. Water regime, different species require different water regimes, which means how much water is in the soil. Those trees that are at the top of the hill don't require as much water as those at the bottom of the hill. And so we can tell by the species growing what the amount of water in the soil is. Soil type. We can also tell the different types of soils that exist because of the different species of trees growing on that particular site. Past land use. Back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and early 50s, we utilized our lands for a lot of cultivation, whether it was for growing crops or whether it was for a field situation for livestock. But what happened is in the early 50s, we started letting these things go. And so what happened is we had trees growing up, and we can walk into yellow poplar stands that are almost 100% pure yellow poplar, simply because it had all the right conditions for it. We can go other places and find other different species. One that may be familiar to you is sycamore along creek beds. But we can tell the land use. Fire history, we don't do too much prescribed burning here in the state of Kentucky, but we do have wildfires here. And we can, by looking at the base of the trees, we can see if that particular area was involved with any types of wildfire. Product opportunity. Uh, there's 50 commercially different important species here in the state of Kentucky that we think about when we talk about the forest industry. Going from white oak, which is for the barrel stave community right now, walnut, we all recognize the beauty in a walnut board, whether it's used in our homes, furniture, whatever it might be. And all the way down to if you were in the southern United States, if you were in the pine plantations, we're talking about boards that we would use for the construction of homes. And health. We can tell a lot by the health of a forest by looking at it, seeing the tree species and their response. But there are more stories that can be told if we look at it from a different perspective. And the last picture you saw, the tree was standing up, and this one's cut across, and this is what we call our cross section. I want to reminisce back a number of years ago when I was asked by a teacher to come in and teach fifth grade class, and she told me what they were going to be talking about. And basically it was diameter, radius, and circumference. They probably teach us now in first grade or primary school, I'm not sure, but fifth grade was when they wanted to talk about it. So I put together a wonderful program talking about how this cross section could teach us a little about radius, diameter, and circumference. And when I started passing out these cross sections, it wasn't too long before I heard numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And like I said, when we were on the screen there, I think it is in our DNA to, if we see a cross section, we just automatically just start counting, because very vividly we can see the age of this particular tree. And I think most of us, our DNA ends about there, and that is that we talk about the age, but that's about all the farther we go. We're going to go into it a little deeper now. And what are some of these other stories that we can retrieve from a cross section of a tree? We need to go to 8th grade biology for just a moment, folks. And that is, we need to talk about the biology of a tree or a living plant. We all recognize the fact that the outer bark down there in the left-hand corner is the protection of the outside of the tree. And then the other one, the hardwood, is the very center. This is where we get our boards from that we use to build our homes, to build furniture, whatever it might be, for floor planks such as that. That's where we get that material. And then we are getting to the things that we probably forgot about in the 8th grade, and that is the cambium. There's a real thin layer in the outer edges of the tree, and it produces what we refer to as phloem and xylem, and they're right over here. The phloem conducts food down to the roots. So when a tree is growing, has leaves on it, produces food, it takes it to the roots to store it. The sapwood, or the xylem, conducts water and minerals to the crown. And that's the one that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, is the xylem. Not scientifically, but simply to understand a little bit more what's going on here. Now, the xylem and the phloem, they're basically tubes, just like these straws. These tubes are they are packed into this tree, and they are pushing water either up or down, depending on whether they're phloem or xylem. All right. So what we're going to do now is take a look at this schematic that I've put together here, or that was put together. And the center of the tree is down towards the bottom. Actually, this segment over here on the left is duplicated over here. So we're in the center of the tree, and we come out here, and these big holes that you see right here, this is our early springwood, all right? And these large xylem tubes have been constructed as the tree begins to grow. Remember, in the springtime, it has to put water up there so it can produce the leaves. It has to produce the seed or the flowers. And there's a lot of need for a lot of water early in the spring. So these tubes that we just talked about, the xylem, are very, very large. But then what happens is, as the year goes on, these, here's the large ones, and then here's the smaller ones. And what happens is there's a limited amount of water in the soil, and also the tree doesn't have to use as much water. So what the tree has done is it's regulated its xylem cells to be much smaller. So I'm going to take this picture and push it over here, and that is these small cells are the dark circles that you see. The big wide cells are the white portions of this tree. So if we simply counted the wide cells, large cells, count from here to here, that would be 1 year. So from here to here is another year. So that's how we can count these rings. So here's a simple cross section, and you can see the white portion is the xylem, where these tubes are huge in the springtime. And then what happens is later on in the fall, they become much smaller. So the dark portion is the summer wood. The yellow or the white portion of this is spring wood. So let's think about also what are the requirements for the continued growth in both height and width of a tree. What they need, a tree to grow, is going to need moisture, which is the soil water. It's going to need some nutrients to add to the growth. And also it needs sunlight. Remember, sunlight is that key element of the chlorophyll system. We're not going to chlorophyll today, folks. Don't worry about that. So let's take a look at this particular cross section. This is a hickory, and I'm going to take a section out here and blow it up to the left. And what you're looking at is the center of the tree is at the top, and we're going to take this row right here. This is this huge, these are these large xylem tubes early in the spring. And you can see those white bands in there. Those are the large xylem tubes in the spring. And then the darker sections are the xylem tubes later in the season, summer and fall. And again, they are much smaller. And so you can actually see right here, you can see the large tubes and then the slow growth. This is a hickory, so it has a little different characteristic of growth and genetics than what the conifer was that I was showing you a moment ago. This is a mulberry, and you can see here's the dead center, and you can see the large tubes, large xylem tubes, large xylem tubes, large xylem tubes. The dark part are xylem tubes also, but they're just smaller in size. So going from the transition of spring wood to summer wood, we have something that we can refer to and count to as annual rings. This is where we're going to get into going beyond just counting the age of a tree. You can see here's the center, and you can see for 3 years this tree did quite well, did real well growing, relatively compared to in the picture we have here. Then for the next 10 years or so, it slowed down its growth, and then in the last 20 years or so, it slowed down even more. Well, what creates that? Let's move on to the next one. Here's a duplication of that picture that we just had on the last one. And again, we have the same situation, the start, the first year, second year, third year, fourth year. Those moved along relatively quickly. And then we take a look at the next segment and we see that they're starting to slow down, not only starting to slow down in the space between the annual rings, but also there is less spring wood and more summer wood. So a lot, either we ask the question or it is told to us whenever we're doing a program. And I've heard this from the youngest of children to the oldest of adults. They say that the reason that these rings are slowing down on here is because there's a lack of water. What is not a lack of water, we're going to see that in a few minutes. What it is, it's a lack of sunlight. There's just less and less sunlight hitting this tree. Let me show you an example. Here's another one. Again, it was doing real well, and then all of a sudden it slowed down immensely, tremendously. Well, that was because it there was less and less sunlight given to it. This particular tree, I know it real well. It fell across a road that I had to move it out of the way. 2 years, well, maybe 3. Yeah, it looks like maybe 3 years this tree grew well, and the rest of its life, it was a very slow growing tree, simply due to tree and competition. This competition are other trees around it. They either are pushing its canopy very close together, or else it's actually growing over top of a canopy, and the tree has less canopy, less leaves, less food, less growth. Here's a hickory, and you can see here that the tree did fairly well relatively. We don't know exactly how well it could have done, but we can see that it was growing real well here. And then all of a sudden, it slowed down, and then it took off again. This is simply due to sunlight. It was receiving adequate sunlight, then probably another tree or groups of trees overtook it, and then there could have been maybe a windstorm, or somebody came in and cut a tree down right here, so this tree started to grow again. So it's sunlight or the lack of it, and then the reoccurrence. So it had adequate sunlight. Sunlight was reduced, most likely overtopped, and then all of a sudden that competition was removed and this tree could continue to grow again. This, I think, is a very good example of this transition. You can see for the first X number of years, it was growing very well. And then all of a sudden, for the next 20 years or so, it slowed down tremendously. And then what happened right here was competition was removed, and this tree was able to start growing again. Not as quickly or as much as what it had in the beginning, but it did have the opportunity to respond from the removal of competition. Another hickory that we have right here, and you can see it was doing rather well. And then in this particular segment, it started to slow down again. And then again, right here, the competition was removed. It looks like the competition started coming back right here. I think like for the 4 or 5 years in the end there was more competition. So you had this transition between enough light and not enough light. So recognize the fact that the age has nothing to do with diameter and height. It's the amount of sunlight it gets. I can remember doing a program where we were dealing with hemlocks. We had huge hemlocks growing around us. They were maybe 3 feet in diameter, and there were some small hemlocks on the ground, and they were only about 1 inch in diameter. I cut one of those off and found out that that hemlock on the ground was probably 52 years old and was only about 1 inch in diameter. Sunlight is our biggest element, and that probably summarizes what a forester does for their entire career. He or she is trying to maximize its growth. On this particular one on the left here, you can see it was growing probably as fast as it could possibly do. Then it actually just stopped growing, and the number of rings is unbelievably tight right here, and absolutely a number of them. So what a forester's job is to do is to keep this growth going at all costs, and that is what we normally do in the forestry profession. Is when we see this slowing down, we go in there and we do something. We do some we use some management tool, most likely thin, eliminate competition. I want to talk about this word right here. It's dendrochronology. And if we break it down, this will be your Latin class for the day. Dendro means tree, chronology means, or chron means time, and ology means to study. So there are people out there that actually take these cross sections and they work with them to determine a lot of history. They are called a dendrochronologist. And yes, you can actually create a career for yourself being a dendrochronologist. And we're talking 40, 50 years, some of these people are involved in this. They simply go out there and look at cross sections of trees. Now, a concern you might have, and that is, if we cut these trees down, then how are we going to glue them back together after we've counted the rings and saw their growth? Well, what we do is, instead of cutting them down, we bore into them with an increment bore. And we simply, it's a hollow tube. It's like a soil probe. We drill this in there, and then what we do is we pull out a increment. Now, the thing that we normally do is we only look at the last 5 to 10 years growth to see if it's slowed down any. And if it hasn't, we continue letting it grow. If we see that it's starting to slow down, we take some management tool and move forward from there. But we make this small insert. A lot of people are concerned, does this cause harm to the tree? It causes harm in the tree if you do it in the first 16 feet. Normally, we like to do it below stump level, below 1 foot, because if you were to cut a board out of this, you would have a hole. So we do it. We don't do it all the time to every tree. We do it. We walk into a stand, make a judgment call, and then take a boring to find out if our judgment call is correct. I wanted to leave you with this particular picture right here, and that is, if you notice, we have 3 centers. This is a black locust, and they are notorious for growing up in stumps, which means 3, 4, 5 branches growing out of the ground when they start growing. And what happened is these 3 branches grew into one tree, and so they became going from individual trees to one large one. But this is a locust. So this brings us to the end. I did want you to learn something from this today. I'd like you to take away from this class 5 new words. One is dendrochronology, or dendrochronologist, a person who counts rings and looks at the scientific message that is sending to us. An increment bore is that instrument that we can drill a tree and determine the age or the growth pattern of that particular tree. The cambium, it produces xylem and phloem. Phloem is the tubes that take food to the roots, and xylem is the ones that are actively working right now, pushing as much water as it can up into the crown and trying to get those leaves fully developed and then produce the flowers that need to be brought on to bring on seeds. So there's a lot of water going through that xylem, producing those huge holes that will change over this summer to be the darker color. So I'm not sure if there's any questions or not. I wasn't able to see them. I'll get rid of my share here in just a second. But these are the 5 words that are probably important to you. What I would like to do is, instead of trying to remember them, try better yet to bring them into your conversation at the dinner table tonight. Dendrochronologist, increment borer, cambium, phloem, and xylem. Put that all into one sentence, and you've learned a lot today. So I'll break off here.
Thank you, Doug.
Stop
We
sharing.
greatly appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you could tell us a little bit, though, if so obviously you don't go out and bore every single one of your trees to find out the age. So do you find the biggest tree? Do you find what's an average size? How do you find the average size out, or age?
Correct. What you do is you walk into a stand and you start looking at it. And again, there's a lot more to this forestry magic than just this one aspect. But you'll walk into a stand, and what you're going to do is you're trying to pick out a dominant tree, a tree that has a full crown in it, and it is probably one that has probably taken advantage of all the sunlight, all the moisture, and all the nutrients. And what you want to do is bore that tree and see how well it's growing. And if it's not growing well, you need to start, again, adapting some management tools that we have privy to us. And that means cutting other trees down, most likely.
All right. Well, thank you for your presentation. We greatly appreciate it.
I was going to say, I really appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. I'm glad to have been here today.
Yeah, you did a good job, Doug. You really did. And I hope people will take it to heart, especially if we have woodland owners out there, and we do a lot of management out there, but it's based on, kind of reading the forest and matching it up with your objectives. So, if you all have questions about the age of your trees, talk to your forester about it, and they can give you some insight to it as well. So thank you, Doug.
All right. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, good. Good to have been here today. Thank you very much.
Always glad to have you. Go out and go do another program somewhere. I'm sure you will be. Yeah, I know.
Tomorrow I'll be with you.
Yes, yes. All right. Thanks, Doug.
All right. So moving on to our tree of the week.
Yeah, so Laurie can't be with us this week. She's actually doing another program herself, but we do have her tree of the week, and this one is a really cool tree. It's a magnolia as well, and last week we had the cucumber tree, so we're staying kind of in that magnolia vein. They're related, but this is the big leaf magnolia. This has the biggest single leaf of any tree in eastern North America. So it's got a really giant leaf. And if you've been in, maybe in the gorge or in the mountains, you may have seen these giant leaves. Now there's another one, and she'll probably talk about the umbrella that has a similar leaf, but it's a little bit smaller. So, but I'll go ahead and let Laurie take off with her tree of the week.
All right, sounds great.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the big leaf magnolia. Big leaf magnolia, Magnolia macrophylla, is a deciduous to semi-evergreen tree that is known for its extremely large leaves. In fact, it has some of the largest simple leaves of any tree native to North America. Big leaf magnolia typically grows about 30 to 40 feet tall, and it has a rounded canopy and somewhat coarse appearance. It has a moderate growth rate and is relatively short-lived. Big leaf magnolia is typically an understory tree in a forest setting. The unusually large leaves and showy flowers make this a really interesting specimen tree in the landscape. Big leaf magnolia is native to Ohio, down to Florida, in Arkansas, and to Louisiana. While it occurs over a relatively large area, it is a scarce tree throughout its range. In Kentucky, it is found mostly in the eastern part of the state. Trees grow best in moist, well-drained soils that are slightly acidic and with a fair amount of organic content. It is usually found growing in river valleys, coves, or ravines, and along streams. The tree is classified as shade tolerant. Trees are susceptible to ice and wind damage, and if planting is a specimen tree in the landscape, the site should meet the tree's soil and moisture requirements and provide protection from wind. It should be noted that the large leaves decompose slowly, and some may consider them unsightly. The leaves are deciduous but can be semi-evergreen in the deep south. They are alternately arranged on the twig and simple in form. They're usually about 20 to 30 inches long with entire, somewhat wavy margins. The base of the leaf resembles two earlobes, or the letter B, as you can see in the picture, and this is a good way to tell big leaf magnolia from umbrella magnolia, which has a V-shaped leaf base, which you can also see in the photo. The leaves are green above and whitish with hairs on the underside, and fall leaf color is yellow. Big leaf magnolia is monoecious, meaning the tree has both male and female flowers. The flowers are creamy white, large, about 10 to 14 inches across. They're showy and very fragrant. The inner flower petals tend to have a light purple stain near the base. The flowers bloom in spring from May until June, depending on location. And trees typically begin to flower after about 12 years of age, and the flowers are pollinated by beetles. The fruit is cone-like and nearly round, and it's typically about 2 to 3 inches long, and as it matures, it turns to a very attractive rose color. The surface is somewhat fuzzy, and the fruit ripens in late summer and releases individual red-coated seeds suspended on slender threads at maturity. A few songbirds and a few small mammals eat the seeds. The bark is thin, smooth, and grayish-brown, and tends to develop platy patches as the tree ages. The national champion big leaf magnolia as of 2021 is in Baltimore, Maryland. It has a 90-inch circumference. It's 70 feet tall with a 56-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion as of 2021 is in Bell County at Pine Mountain State Resort Park. It has a 35-inch circumference, is 60 feet tall with an 18-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest National Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about big leaf magnolia. The tree's common name comes from its very large leaves. In fact, they are considered the largest simple leaves in North America. Native Americans, including the Cherokee, use the inner bark as an analgesic, also for an upset stomach and for toothaches. Big leaf magnolia was described by the French naturalist André Michaux in 1795 and was introduced into cultivation in 1800. Even though it's not widely used as a landscape tree, it's more of a specimen tree. In fall and winter, after the leaves have fallen to the forest floor, it appears to be strewn with newspaper underneath those trees. The genus name Magnolia was in honor of 18th century French botanist Pierre Magnol, and the species name Macrophylla is from the Greek makros and phylla, which means large leaves. I hope you enjoyed learning about big leaf magnolia and get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, local park, or neighborhood and enjoy this most interesting magnolia.
We always enjoy those, and I appreciate Lori doing those again. And those big flowers is always really showy and really beautiful.
Yeah, it's a really cool tree. If you ever get a chance to see it, check it out. And those leaves are amazing. They really can get so big.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
beautiful tree. And I'm sure we'll hear about the umbrella magnolia at some point in the future. So she's going to get all of the trees of Kentucky before this is done. We've got so many of these that are set aside as the common trees of Kentucky on our website. So you can check those out, individual segments. What a great repository of great information about Kentucky's forest trees.
Definitely, definitely. All right. Well, moving on to our next segment, we are talking about
About this one.
Yeah. So Megan and Ellen, if you can talk a little bit about, we're going to start a mushroom highlight about once a month. Tell us a little bit about what you all are going to be showing us.
Great. So Megan and I are mycophiles. We are mushroom lovers. And last year, we started a video series on what's that fungus, some kind of common mushrooms and other fungal fruiting bodies that you might run into, just short little clips about these. And if you haven't met Megan already, she is a forest health technician with me in the Forest Health Extension Group. She is also a soon-to-be graduate student in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And she is a mushroom hunter and a mushroom grower. So she's going to tell you a little bit about some mushrooms, and we'll start this each month, a different mushroom each month. And if you have some nominations, feel free to send them our way. But with that, I want to turn it over to Megan.
Great.
So today we're going to be talking about Ganoderma applanatum. It's sometimes called the artist's conch fungus or the artist shelf fungus. And this is something that you'll learn a little bit more about in the video. But this is the fungus that we're going to be talking about today. And this is a series that we're going to be doing over the next few months, highlighting different fungi that Dr. Crocker and I have seen out in the woods here in Kentucky. These are all mushrooms you can find on your local hikes here in the gorge or elsewhere. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop us a message or shoot us an email and let us know if there are any fungi that you would like to see in these videos. This is Ganoderma applanatum. It's sometimes called the artist conch fungus or the artist shelf fungus, and we'll get to why in just a moment. But these fungi are really sweet wood decaying fungi from the genus Ganoderma. It's a fairly good-sized genus in our area with some really distinctive members, including this guy. They have a shelf-like woody fruiting structure that is very tough. They're not something that easily breaks apart. And they grow on decaying hardwood trees, either as saprophytes or as parasites. They tend to have a brown to buff colored top to the fruiting body, and they can sometimes have a slightly dusty appearance. They may also be more of a light gray color on occasion. It just depends on what they're fruiting on and the age of the specimen. As Ganoderma fungi, they don't have gills on the underside of the fruiting body. They have very, very small pores, and they produce white spores that are released off of the fruiting body and float away in the wind. They're called artist conch fungi because when you bruise them or mark them with any kind of an implement, a pocket knife, a twig, or your fingers, they very readily bruise and have a distinctive darker color underneath. And so people will often use these fungi to create really beautiful, almost scrimshaw style depictions and drawings on the fruiting bodies of these fungi.
Well, thank you, Megan. We greatly appreciate that. And then these short little clips are awesome that we can be able to show them every now and then. And we greatly appreciate that. But Ellen, is this, or Megan, there she is there one you would eat or not?
This is a mushroom that you wouldn't really want to eat. It's a very woody mushroom. A lot of these Ganoderma fungi, they're not at all a soft kind of mushroom. They have a very hard, woody texture. And even if you could eat it, I don't know that you would really want to. It would be a bit like chewing on a piece of wood or leather.
There are some other Ganoderma species that are valued for their medicinal use, and people might prepare them and consume them, but they don't eat them. They kind of make a tea or a tincture with it, but not this one that we talked about today.
I think it brings up a good point. You shouldn't eat any mushroom unless you know what it is, right? I mean,
definitely
Absolutely.
no mushroom, no matter how good, is worth your life. So yeah, you don't need to do that. But this is an interesting one for us in the forest health world because it can cause some tree health problems as well. So not kind of just looking interesting and seeing it in the woods, but it can cause decay of trees, of roots, of the base of trees, and potentially structural problems later, right, Megan?
That's right. This is a white rot fungus. And if you've seen a white or brown rot on decaying wood, you might know what that looks like. Different forms of decay that happens where fungi are taking nutrients out of the trees through decomposing either cellulose or lignin. And so this is a white rot fungus. It is decaying that lignin component of the tree and leaving behind that cellulose material. And it can lead to serious structural issues sometimes. But just because you see this mushroom on your tree doesn't mean that it's going to fall on your house the next day. No need to panic, but it can sometimes be an indication of structural issues with the tree.
Yeah, this is a totally normal thing to see in the woods. But if you're seeing this in urban settings, trees that are stressed or that have had damage to the base of the tree or the roots, those are perfect entry points for this fungus. So if you've got this right next to your house, it may be a good opportunity to call an arborist and get a closer look at what's going on there. Not a major cause for concern by itself. They're very common. But certainly if it's there, it's eating some part of your tree and you'd want to know how much.
Does it help to actually remove the mushroom or does that not help at all?
Removing the mushroom isn't really going to do anything. Think of the mushroom as like the apple. It's just the fruit of the organism. The majority of that fungus, of the organism itself, is living inside the tree. Removing the mushroom is just like taking the fruit off of the organism. So that isn't going to do anything to help, unfortunately.
Okay.
I've seen them a lot on black locust.
Black locust gets another similar fungus
okay.
Called the cracked cap polypore that maybe we'll have to profile sometime as well. There are lots of different decay fungi, and if you think of mushrooms and fungi as nature's recyclers, they're breaking down dead material. They're a really important part of our ecosystems. But where we don't like them is when they're, causing disease on living trees. That's, when we come into conflict with them, but they do really important things in breaking down that woody material.
Yeah, everything has a role, correct?
Definitely.
I built a little garden out back and I noticed I've got mushrooms growing on the wood that I built it with. So
yeah, and you know what? They're probably in the mulch, Renee.
Okay.
Is that what are these the ones that you're seeing in the mulch?
No, it's not in the mulch. It's actually coming out of the wood that I built for the box.
Okay, well, that's not as good. I was going to say, when you see them in the mulch, a lot of people get concerned, but they're actually, breaking down that woody material. They're building your soil. They're making your garden better for plants a lot of times. And those aren't mushrooms that are going to hurt your plants. They're things that are just breaking down the dead wood. Now, if they're growing in your raised beds, that might be a problem for other reasons. Your raised beds might not last as long.
All right.
So, but you can leave them in your garden, right, Ellen?
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, I seed my garden beds with fungus, and maybe we'll talk about that one some other time to kind of improve the quality of the soil there.
Awesome.
That's like a great tip. We'll have to get you on for that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Very good. Very good.
Thanks, Megan. Bye.
Bye. Look forward to seeing more of those in the future, Renee.
Definitely. All right, so now we have one more topic, and it is snake ID. Dr. Matt Springer is here to talk about that. Matt, you have a guest with us on your video.
Yeah, a little different setup for this week's Snake ID. We kind of went to a live component per se of our specimen, which is the way I like to see snakes, is alive, but not everybody. But yeah, and then we recruited some expertise out of the department because we do have some. Yes, I am the wildlife specialist, by no means am I a herpetologist, but we do have one. So he was gracious enough to come help us with this week's segment.
Good morning. Today we have a special Kentucky snake identification segment because we have with us Dr. Steve Price, who's our resident herpetologist and associate professor in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources here at UK, who's going to walk us through our snake ID for the week. And Steve, if you want to kind of walk through, you got our study specimen from some of your active research here, but a common snake found in central Kentucky and most of the state?
Right. Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I have with me a very common snake that we find especially in central Kentucky in the bluegrass region. And this snake is a common inhabitant of streams and rivers. You tend to find these guys underneath large rocks or sometimes basking in shrubs along streams or rivers. And there's a couple characteristics that we look at when we try to identify snakes. One is kind of the shape and texture of the scales. And we define snakes as either having what we call like really smooth scales, okay, and sometimes these snakes are kind of shiny in appearance, or rough scales, and these snakes usually have a little ridge through their scale. And if we can look carefully at this snake, it does have a little ridge through its scale.
He looks a little bumpy.
Yeah, a little bumpy, right? So we can look at that on this snake, and that helps us kind of break it down into potential different groups of species, all that have these rough scales, okay? And then there's some other characteristics that we look at. And I have here an adult of this species and also a little baby one, okay? And on the baby one, we can see on the belly, there's some lines there, okay? There should be about 4 lines on the belly of it.
Yeah, they're easy to see.
Right. And if you look at the back of the snake, you can see that there's like about 3 dark lines, okay?
Which you can't really see on her.
No. As they get larger, a lot of times snakes lose their color, okay? So this guy has 7 lines on them, on this snake, and it has rough scales or keeled scales. And that really makes it our identification pretty easy, okay, after we see those 2 features. So this snake that we have here is a queen snake, a highly aquatic snake that likes to hang out in streams. And it likes to hang out in streams because it has a specific food item that it loves to eat.
I was just going to ask you about that. These guys are food specialists, aren't they?
Right. Do you know what it likes to eat?
I do.
Okay.
I'm guessing other people may not, but it's crayfish, isn't it?
Crayfish, yeah. Especially crayfish that just molt. You know, crayfish will shed their skin, you know, and molt that exoskeleton.
So they're like a soft-shelled crab kind of
Like a soft-shelled crab, yeah. So these snakes specialize in eating soft-shelled crayfish, okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is also almost an adult or sub-adult?
Yeah, that's a sub-adult, maybe about a 2-year-old snake, and that snake is a male, okay? Mm-hmm. And this snake is about 5 years old, and this is a female.
Now you mentioned something to us before we started here about that snake and how many times you've caught it for your research project.
Yeah.
And that's that you caught it when it was the size of
this snake right here.
And that's why you know how old it is. And you said 24 different times you've caught it?
We've caught it 24 different times since 2016.
All in the same place?
All in the same spot.
So it never really moves around?
No, I mean, maybe it moved 10 feet, you know, upstream or 10 feet downstream from where we caught it, but it always has stayed pretty much in the same area.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I know you've got a bunch of different things going on with snake research we don't really have time to get into, but at some point we'll have to invite you back so you can kind of tell people, especially the snake fungal disease aspect, which is a pretty important issue for our snakes in Kentucky.
Yeah,
So,
sure. Love to talk about it sometime.
Thank you, Steve, for being here and spending time and bringing out your snakes for our Snake ID.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Matt. We greatly appreciate that. And, I love the way how you just nonchalantly just holding the snakes and just showing them around. I was like, I would never do that.
Don't do that at home, right? Yeah, unless you know what you got. Yeah.
Well, I was holding on to, they're a little bit more valuable than the normal snakes I would regular. He's got them all tagged, so they're research snakes. So I was a little bit, I didn't want to go lose any of Steve's research for sure. But yeah, they're not often do we get to do a snake ID segment where I'm actually holding the snake. So it was a nice change of pace.
Right, definitely. Well, so you said that these snakes were more aquatic snakes. So do they don't live in the water though, do they?
Well, they spend substantial time in and around water. So they obviously are very good at swimming. And usually you will find them around streams, creeks, ditches that have water in it, anywhere there's a crayfish, right? So they're tied to their food source. They don't really eat anything other than crayfish. So any place you can find a crayfish, you potentially could find them. And they're not you saw the size of the snake that Steve was holding, that adult. They're not a huge snake. They're pretty tiny, 2-3 feet, especially, the females. That was probably a very big female. So they're not a large snake. They're generally, that entire time, not one of them even try to be defensive with us. They're pretty laid back, but you can see them in high numbers in certain areas. So I think some of the stretches that Steve has his work in, he's got dozens of snakes in a very short section of stream.
Yeah, wow. Interesting, very interesting. Love those segments, man. And that's another thing we get a lot of questions about here at the department about snakes and snake identification. So really appreciate you, highlighting some of these species and working with Steve on that.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, Billy, looks like we're done.
No, we covered a lot of ground today, Renee. We really did. We learned about the tree growth rings and what those stories they can tell us about management and care of our forests. We learned about a really cool tree that has the biggest simple leaf in Eastern North America. We learned about a new fungus that we may not have seen and the new snake. So great show. Really appreciate all of you all being with us today and every week. And, encourage you to come back next week and let others know about the show.
We did get one question that just popped in for Matt, wanting to know if a queen snake is a generalist when it comes to
different species of crayfish.
I am not the expert on queen snakes, but it is my understanding, and this I will check with Steve and come back on this, is my understanding that they are not picky on the species of crayfish. It's more that it is a crayfish than anything else.
Sounds good. I just hate to put you back on the spot, Matt, but definitely want to get any questions that are answered.
No doubt. So. Appreciate that very much. So let us know if y'all want to see future things on the show. Fill out our quick little survey on FromTheWoodsToday.com, and you can let us know what's going on there. You can even upload pictures if you've seen anything crazy in your woods or you're not sure what it is.
Definitely. And remember, all the segments that we have are actually on FromTheWoodsToday.com as well. So if there's anything that you're like, oh, what was that? What did they say? You can always go back and look, and all of our episodes are right there.
Yep. No doubt. Well, a big thanks to all of our guests today for another wonderful From the Woods Today show. And Renee, as always, great job kind of coordinating all of this.
Well, thank you, Billy. I greatly appreciate you being my co-host as well. So until then, make sure you tune in with us next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. Take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone.